I walked into the Sterling dining room, exhausted from my 6-month stint in London, only to find the silence deafening before I could sit. My husband, Gavin, raised his wine glass and grinned. He announced that he had sold my old warehouse for $80,000 cash to fund this very party. He had no idea that his forged signature hadn't just committed fraud. It had triggered a top-level federal security protocol. The FBI was already on the way. My name is Elena. I stood frozen in the arched doorway of the Sterling estate, the damp chill of a Seattle autumn clinging to my trench coat, while the warmth of the grand foyer felt suffocating rather than welcoming. I had just stepped off a flight from London, a grueling journey that capped off 6 months of intense regulatory negotiations, yet the exhaustion in my bones had less to do with jet lag and everything to do with the people standing before me. The crystal chandelier overhead cast a fractured light on the crowd, illuminating the grotesque disparity between my reality and theirs. To the guests, this was just another lavish gathering in the secluded hills outside Seattle, a testament to the Sterling family legacy. To me, it was a theater of the absurd where I played the invisible stagehand. For 7 years, I had been the silent engine keeping this machinery running. As the director of compliance at Ether Dynamics, I navigated complex international laws and managed risks for a multi-billion-dollar biopharmaceutical corporation. My decisions protected thousands of jobs and ensured life-saving medications reached the market. Yet, within these silk-wallpapered walls, my career was treated as a quaint hobby, something adorable but ultimately irrelevant. Victoria, my mother-in-law, spotted me first. She did not smile. She simply tilted her champagne flute in my direction, her gaze sweeping over my travel-worn appearance with practiced disdain. "Everyone, look who has finally decided to grace us with her presence," Victoria announced, her voice carrying that sharp, glassy edge she reserved solely for me. "It is Gavin's wife. I suppose you are terribly exhausted from whatever clerical work you were doing over there in Europe." She never used my name if she could help it. I was always Gavin's wife, a title she wielded like a leash. She turned back to her friends, dismissing me as one would a servant who had entered the room at an inopportune moment. I looked at Gavin. At 38 years old, my husband was the picture of American success, provided you did not look at the bank statements. He stood by the fireplace, one hand in the pocket of a bespoke Italian suit that I had paid for, looking every bit the handsome, charming entrepreneur. The family adored him. They called him a visionary. In reality, Gavin was a serial failure who chased trends with the attention span of a gnat. From blockchain startups to organic hydroponic farms, every venture he touched turned to ash, burning through capital that I tirelessly replenished. I remembered the countless Sunday dinners I had endured at this very table, while I cleared the plates and refilled wine glasses, treated indistinguishably from the hired help. Preston, my father-in-law, would puff on his cigar and nod sagely at Gavin's latest delusion. "The boy has the Sterling instinct," Preston would say, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "He just needs the market to catch up to his intellect." They did not know, or perhaps chose to ignore, that I was the one paying the mortgage on the house they were so proud of. I paid the heating bills, the country club dues, and the lease on Gavin's Porsche. He needed the car to project confidence, he had argued. He needed the designer watches to court investors. I was merely the financier, the silent partner who was expected to write checks and keep her mouth shut. The memory that stung the most, the one that surfaced now as I watched him preen before the guests, happened 2 years ago. I had been featured in a prominent industry magazine, a 3-page spread highlighting my work on ethical corporate governance. I had been so proud. I had left the magazine on the kitchen island, hoping Gavin might read it. I came home that evening to find the magazine gone. When I asked him about it, he had pointed to the corner of the living room. He had shredded the pages to line the bottom of his cockatoo's cage. "Don't look at me like that, Elena," he had said, laughing as the bird relieved itself on my photograph. I just thought, well, you were showing off a bit too much. It is unbecoming. Besides, we needed the paper. That was the moment the illusion shattered. I realized I was not a partner. I was a resource. I was a tool to be used until blunt. That realization had driven me to do the one thing I had never done before. I decided to keep something for myself. I decided to buy the Foundry, a dilapidated industrial shell on the edge of the city, a place where I could breathe without the suffocating weight of the sterling expectations. It was meant to be my sanctuary. And now, standing in this room, watching Gavin raise a toast to his own brilliance, I realized with a sick, cold certainty that he had found the one thing I held sacred, and he had sold it to buy applause. I had purchased the Foundry 6 months prior using a performance bonus I had intentionally neglected to deposit into our joint account. It was a derelict metalworks facility built in the 1920s, situated on the edge of a murky industrial lake, miles away from the manicured lawns and gated communities that the Sterlings called home. To anyone else, it was an eyesore, a hulking skeleton of red brick and rusted iron that had been left to rot by the march of progress. To me, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I saw myself in its shattered windows and sturdy, neglected beams. It was broken, yes, but it was still standing. It had weathered storms and abandonment, yet its foundation remained immovable for weeks. I spent my weekends there, telling Gavin I was working overtime at the office. I traded my tailored blazers for coveralls and a respirator. I spent hours on my knees, sanding down century-old hardwood floors until the grain emerged from beneath decades of industrial grime. I replaced the jagged glass in the high clear-story windows, allowing the pale Seattle sunlight to flood the cavernous space. It was grueling physical labor, the kind that left my muscles aching and my hands blistered, but it was the first time in years I had felt truly alive. I remembered the day the previous owner, an elderly woman named Martha, handed me the heavy iron key. She had looked at my tired eyes and sensed a kindred spirit. You know, Martha had said, pressing the cold metal into my palm, her voice raspy with age. This place has a backbone of steel, just like you. Do not let anyone break it. Do not let them take the soul out of it. But secrets in a marriage like mine were ticking time bombs. Gavin eventually found the transaction record on a bank statement I had forgotten to shred. He did not see the potential or the history. He saw a number that he could not spend. He stormed into the bedroom that night, his face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and rage, waving the paper in my face. "Have you lost your mind?" Gavin screamed, his voice cracking. "You bought a factory. It is a useless pile of rubble." Elena. You are throwing our money into a literal garbage pit. Do you know what I could have done with that capital the following Sunday? I was summoned to what felt less like a family dinner and more like a tribunal. We sat in the Sterling living room, the air thick with judgment. My father-in-law, Preston, sat in his leather armchair like a judge delivering a verdict, while Victoria looked at me with pity, as if I were a child who had spent her allowance on magic beans. "Elena, darling," Preston began, using that patronizing tone he reserved for explaining economics to me, despite my dual degrees in finance and law. "We are just concerned. This property is what we call dead money. It generates no yield. It has no liquidity. Gavin tells me it is in a blighted zone. It is embarrassing, frankly," Gavin added, pacing behind the sofa. "My wife, buying a junkyard. I need liquidity for the hydroponics venture. Dad, if we sell it now, maybe we can recoup 60%. "You need to sell it, Elena," Preston commanded, taking a sip of his scotch. "Cut the loss. Let the men handle the investment portfolio from now on." For the first time in 7 years, something hot and sharp flared in my chest. I looked at Gavin, then at his parents. I gripped the fabric of my skirt until my knuckles turned white. "No," I said. The room went silent. Victoria gasped softly. I have inside information. I lied, my voice shaking slightly before finding its footing. The city is rezoning that district next year. Property values are projected to triple. If we sell now, we lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. Greed, I knew, was the only language the Sterlings understood fluently. Preston's eyes narrowed, calculating the imaginary profit. Triple, you say? Preston mused, rubbing his chin. Well, perhaps we hold. For now, they let me keep it, not out of respect for my autonomy, but out of hunger for the future payout. From that day on, the foundry became my sanctuary. It was the only place where I could breathe without feeling the weight of Gavin's failures on my shoulders. I moved my most sensitive work there, setting up a secure server in the renovated loft office. It became my fortress of solitude, a steel and brick vault where I stored the pieces of myself that I was no longer willing to give to them. I just never guessed how vital those thick brick walls would become. The atmosphere at Ether Dynamics shifted overnight when we won the bid for Project Chimera. This was not merely a corporate contract. It was a matter of national security involving the genomic sequencing of half the population. As the director of compliance, I was immediately ordered to London to oversee the encryption exchange protocols. But before I could board a plane, I had to solve a logistical nightmare. The federal mandate required a domestic offline physical backup site for the data keys, a cold storage facility that existed completely off the grid, yet met the highest standards of physical fortification. I knew exactly one building that fit the criteria: the Foundry. I spent the next 48 hours transforming my sanctuary. I did not just install a heavy deadbolt. I authorized the installation of military-grade servers in the basement vault. I signed papers that transferred the regulatory status of the building from a private commercial property to a designated critical infrastructure point under the Department of Homeland Security. I stood in the cold, echoing main hall of the Foundry with Marcus, the head of our internal security division. He handed me a clipboard, his expression grave. "Elena, you need to be absolutely clear on this," Marcus said, tapping the document with his pen. "Once you sign this, that building is no longer just your property. It is federal soil. Any unauthorized entry, any attempt to tamper with the structure or transfer ownership without department clearance. It is not just a lawsuit. It is a federal felony. We are talking 10 to 20 years in prison for anyone who messes with this place." "I understand," I said, signing my name with a steady hand. "It is the only way to keep the data safe while I am in London." "And your husband Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow, 'Does he have access?' "No," I replied sharply. "He thinks it is just an art studio. He has no keys. And he has no interest. However, paranoia is a byproduct of my profession. 2 days before my flight, I prepared a dossier for Gavin. I sat him down at our marble kitchen island, sliding a thick envelope across the counter. Inside was enough cash to cover the household expenses for 6 months, along with a strict set of instructions. Gavin. "Listen to me," I said, trying to catch his eyes, which were glued to his phone screen. "I am going to be in London for a long time. The money for the bills is all here. But there is one rule. The Foundry is off limits. I have sensitive work stored there. Do not go near it. Do not try to open it." Gavin barely looked up. He reached for the envelope, thumbing through the stack of bills with a greedy smirk. "Relax, babe." He scoffed, finally looking at me. "Why would I want to go to that dump I have? Other things to focus on. My new venture is taking off." He paused, pulling out the supplementary credit card I had included. "Is the limit on this still?" 50,000, he asked, his eyes lighting up. "Yes," I sighed, feeling a wave of exhaustion. "Just promise me you will leave the building alone." "Promised. Promised," he muttered, pocketing the card. "You worry too much." I did not trust him. I could not afford to. The night before I left, I drove to the foundry one last time. High up in the rafters, concealed within the rusted iron beams, I installed 3 satellite uplink cameras. They ran on independent solar batteries and transmitted directly to a secure server accessible only by my phone. If a single soul stepped foot on the property, I would know. The next morning, the drive to the airport was silent. Gavin drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, checking his watch every 30 seconds. When we pulled up to the departure curb, he did not put the car in park. He kept the engine running. I would come in, he said, leaning over to give me a perfunctory peck on the cheek. But I am late. Meeting a potential partner for the business. You know how it is. I know, I said, stepping out onto the curb with my luggage. I watched as he sped away without a backward glance, the taillights of the Porsche fading into the traffic. He was rushing toward his freedom, unaware that he was driving blindly toward a cliff edge that I had unknowingly set the moment I signed those federal papers. I turned and walked into the terminal, the weight of the secret I carried heavy in my chest, but mixed with a strange, cold resolve. The trap was set. Even if I had never intended to catch him in it, London was a blur of gray rain and glowing monitors. The demands of Project Chimera were relentless, often keeping me in the secure server room until 3 in the morning. In the beginning, I tried to maintain a connection with home. I scheduled video calls with Gavin to align with the 8-hour time difference, but he became increasingly elusive. Our conversations, once daily, dwindled to brief, pixelated exchanges where he barely looked at the camera. I am just swamped. Elena, Gavin would say, his eyes darting to something off-screen. The new venture it is really demanding my attention right now. While he claimed to be buried in work, his digital footprint told a different story. Late at night, unable to sleep in my empty corporate apartment, I would scroll through social media. Gavin was tagging himself at restaurants I had always wanted to try, but he had deemed too expensive. I saw him wearing a bespoke navy blazer that I certainly had not bought him, raising a glass of vintage scotch. And then, I noticed her. She was in the background of a photo at the country club. Then, she was sitting next to him at a gala. Jessica. The caption described her as a brilliant investment consultant. She was young, with the kind of polished, predatory beauty that made me feel old and tired. My suspicion turned into alarm when my phone pinged with a notification from the smart home system at our main residence. Connection lost. I messaged Gavin immediately. The house cameras are down. Is the power out? His reply came 4 hours later. No power outage. I just disconnected them. The router was acting up, and the tech guy said we need to do a full firmware update. It might take a few weeks to get the parts. It was a clumsy lie. Routers do not need weeks for parts. But Gavin did not know about the independent system at the foundry. That night, I pulled up the feed from the satellite uplink cameras I had hidden in the rafters of my warehouse. The image was grainy, black and white, but clear enough to stop my heart. A black luxury SUV pulled up to the rusted gates of the foundry. Gavin stepped out, accompanied by a man holding a clipboard, clearly a real estate agent, and Jessica. I watched in silence as Gavin gestured expansively at the building, pointing out the structural integrity, acting as if he owned the place. Jessica walked around the perimeter, touching the brickwork possessively. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox from the city property management office. It was an automated alert. Subject inquiry regarding zoning variances for parcel 402. It meant someone was trying to see if the land could be rezoned for residential condominiums. I called Gavin. It was midnight in London, but I knew he was awake. Why is a real estate agent looking at the foundry? Gavin, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. There was a long silence on the other end. You are spying on me, Gavin sputtered, his voice pitching up in defense. That was not an agent. That was just an appraiser for insurance purposes, I told you. I am trying to help you manage your assets while you are gone. You are being paranoid. Do not touch that building. I warned him. Gavin, I am serious. Do not do anything stupid. You are crazy, he snapped. Work is roasting your brain. Go to sleep. Elena. He hung up. That was the last time we spoke. By the 5th month, the silence was absolute. My text messages went unread. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. But the bank notifications were loud and clear. He was draining our liquid assets. Withdrawals of $9,000, $4,000, and $6,000 hit the joint account in rapid succession. He was careful to stay under the $10,000 reporting threshold, or so he thought. But the pattern was undeniable. He was clearing the decks. I sat in my office in London, staring at the latest withdrawal notification. He was not just cheating on me. He was liquidating my life. He thought he had time. He thought I was stuck in Europe for another month closing the deal. I picked up the phone and dialed the airline. I need a one-way ticket to Seattle. I told the agent, for tomorrow morning, and I need it to be completely off the manifest if possible, or at least blocked from family notification alerts. I packed my bags that night. I printed out every bank statement, every frame of video from the foundry, and the logs of his firmware update lie. I was coming home 2 weeks early, and I was bringing a storm with me. Gavin wanted to play the big businessman. I was about to show him exactly how a director of compliance handled a breach of contract. I stepped off the plane at SeaTac Airport into a wall of gray, relentless drizzle. There was no sleek black car waiting at the curb, no husband leaning against the hood with a bouquet of flowers to welcome me home. I had not expected fanfare, but the utter absence of Gavin confirmed what the silence of the last few weeks had already whispered. I hailed a yellow taxi, the wipers slapping a rhythmic, mournful beat against the windshield as we navigated the slick highway toward the suburbs. When the taxi dropped me off at my own driveway, the house loomed like a stranger in the mist. I dragged my suitcase up the wet steps and punched my code into the smart lock. The keypad flashed an angry red. I tried again. Denied. He had changed the master code. My hands shook, not from the cold, but from a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. I dug into the bottom of my purse for the physical emergency key I kept hidden in the lining, a relic from before the digital upgrade. The tumbler clicked, a heavy, mechanical sound that felt like breaking into a vault. I pushed the door open and the smell hit me first. It was not the clean scent of cedar and lemon I maintained. It was heavy, cloying, a mixture of vanilla potpourri and cheap, floral perfume. I walked into the living room and stopped dead. My home had been erased. My mid-century modern furniture, the pieces I had curated with such care, were gone. In their place sat overstuffed velvet sofas in a garish shade of teal, accented by gold-painted side tables that looked like they belonged in a Las Vegas hotel lobby. I walked to the garage door and yanked it open. There, stacked haphazardly against the wall, were my books, my paintings, and my clothes, shoved into cardboard boxes labeled storage. I went upstairs, my heels clicking loudly on the hardwood, a sound of invasion in my own sanctuary. The master bedroom was the final insult. The crisp white linens were gone. The bed was now dressed in slippery black silk sheets. I opened the closet. My business suits had been pushed to the far end, compressed to make room for rows of sequined dresses and animal print tops that I would never wear. It was not just an affair, it was a displacement. Jessica had not just moved into my bed, she was moving into my life. I turned around and walked out. I did not cry. Tears required a level of emotional vulnerability I could no longer afford. I got into my car, which was thankfully still parked in the driveway, and drove straight to the foundry. The drive took 40 minutes. When I turned onto the gravel road leading to the lake, my stomach twisted. The heavy iron gate, the one I had carefully restored, was secured with a brand new, bright orange industrial chain. The lock I had installed was gone, cut off and lying in the dirt, and there, planted firmly in the soft earth where my wildflower garden used to be, was a large wooden sign. It featured a glossy rendering of glass-walled high-rises and a smiling couple drinking wine on a balcony. The text was bold and cheerful. Coming soon, lakefront luxury condos. Sold. I sat in the idling car, staring at the word sold until the letters blurred. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had sold a federal data storage facility to a condo developer. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up. It was an automated notification from the Sterling Family Events group chat. Victory party for Gavin tonight at Mom and Dad's. 7 o'clock. Attendance mandatory to celebrate the big sale. I looked at the time. It was 5 in the afternoon. I had 2 hours. I reversed the car and drove back to the house that was no longer mine. I went to the garage, ripped open the box labeled Elena Winter, and pulled out my garment bag. I bypassed the master bedroom and used the guest shower, scrubbing the travel grime and the feeling of the house off my skin. I chose my armor carefully. I put on my sharpest charcoal suit, the one I wore to close million-dollar compliance audits. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, hiding the dark circles and the pallor of exhaustion. I painted my lips a deep, blood-red crimson. When I looked in the mirror, the tired wife who had boarded the plane in London was gone. Staring back was the director of compliance, and she was ready to audit the books. You want a celebration. Gavin. I whispered to my reflection, my voice steady and cold. I will give you a night you will never forget. The atmosphere inside the Sterling estate was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the cloying aroma of unearned victory. Waiters in white jackets navigated through the crowd, balancing silver trays laden with Osetra caviar and crystal flutes of vintage champagne. It was a scene of aggressive opulence, a desperate attempt to project wealth that I knew, for a fact, existed only on credit. When I stepped into the grand salon, the hum of conversation severed as if someone had cut the power cord. Heads turned. The cheerful clinking of glassware stopped. I stood in the archway, my charcoal suit a stark, dark contrast to the sea of pastel cocktail dresses and shimmering jewelry. Victoria broke the silence, her voice dripping with that specific brand of poison she masqueraded as politeness. "Oh, look," she announced, gesturing vaguely in my direction with her half-empty glass. "It is Elena. You are back. Early. We thought you were still buried in your little papers over in London." "Hello. Victoria," I said, my voice flat. Gavin detached himself from a group of admirers near the piano. He was flushed, likely from the alcohol, but when he saw me, a flicker of panic darted behind his eyes before he plastered on his signature charming grin. He opened his arms as if to embrace me, but stopped short when he saw the look on my face. Standing right beside him, so close she was practically wearing his jacket, was Jessica. Her hand rested casually, possessively, on his shoulder, her manicured fingers brushing against his lapel. Elena, Gavin exclaimed, his voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. What a wonderful surprise we were just celebrating. "So I see," I replied, not moving an inch. Gavin cleared his throat and turned back to the room, deciding that the best defense was a loud offense. He raised his glass high. "Everyone, please, raise a glass," he shouted, "to vision. And to taking action as I was telling you all. I finally made the executive decision to liquidate that deadweight asset my wife insisted on holding on to. The foundry is gone." A ripple of polite applause went through the room. "Sold it this morning." Gavin beamed, puffing out his chest. $80,000. Cash deal. Quick and clean. No more inspections. No more taxes on a pile of rubble. My stomach churned. $80,000. The land alone was appraised at $400,000, and with the structural reinforcements and server farm I had installed, the value was in the millions. He had sold it for the price of a luxury sedan. Brilliant move. "Son," Preston, my father-in-law, bellowed from his armchair. That is what I call business sense. Liquidate the trash. Free up the capital. You said you are putting it all into Jessica's cryptocurrency fund. Right, smart. Very smart. Absolutely. Gavin nodded, glancing at Jessica, who smirked at me. We are going to double it in a month. But Gavin, a neighbor asked, looking slightly confused. I thought the deed was in Elena's name. The room went quiet again. Gavin laughed, a nervous, hacking sound. Well, Elena was so busy with her job, Gavin said, waving his hand dismissively. I just took the initiative. I know a guy, a notary downtown. He understands that sometimes. Paperwork just gets in the way of progress. A little signature here, a little stamp there. It is all for the family good. Right. He had just admitted to forgery and fraud in front of 40 witnesses. I sat down on the nearest velvet ottoman, placing my clutch on my lap. I did not reach for a drink. Under the table, my hand gripped my phone. The screen was pulsing with a silent red notification from the Ether Dynamics remote security app. Critical alert, unauthorized ownership transfer detected. Level 5. Security protocol initiated, FBI notified. Gavin walked over to me, mistaking my silence for submission. He leaned down, his breath smelling of stale wine and arrogance. Don't look so sour. Elena, he whispered, loud enough for Jessica to hear and giggle. You should thank me. That $80,000 it paid for this party, and it is paying for the first-class trip to Cabo I booked for us next week. I am finally fixing the mess you made. I looked up at him, my expression unreadable. You have no idea what you have done. Gavin, I said softly. I made us rich. He scoffed, straightening his tie. Just try to enjoy the champagne. Okay, it cost a fortune. My phone vibrated against the table, a harsh and persistent buzzing that cut through the clinking of crystal glasses. I glanced down at the screen. The name displayed made my blood turn to ice. Arthur Vance, Senior General Counsel for Ether Dynamics. Arthur did not make social calls. He only called when the world was ending. Excuse me, I said, standing up abruptly. Oh, let it go to voicemail, Elena Gavin shouted, his face flushed with champagne. Work, work, work. Tonight is about success. I ignored him and walked briskly into the hallway, pressing the phone to my ear. Before I could even say hello, Arthur's voice exploded on the line, loud enough that I had to pull the device away from my ear. Elena! Where the hell are you? Arthur screamed, his usual composure completely shattered. Why has the Department of Homeland Security just issued a Level 5 containment order for the Foundry? I have agents on the line asking why our physical backup site has been transferred to a shell corporation based in a non-extradition zone. I leaned against the wall, trying to keep my breathing steady. Arthur, slow down, I said. Gavin, my husband, he forged my signature. He sold the building this morning without my knowledge. Who is the buyer? It is not a developer, Elena Arthur yelled. The deed transfer went to Global Vanguard Holdings. Intel says that is a front for a foreign state entity currently under a strict technology embargo. Do you understand what this means? We are not talking about a zoning violation. This is the Economic Espionage Act. This is trafficking in classified genetic data. This is treason. Elena. The hallway seemed to tilt. Gavin hadn't just sold a building. He had sold a vault containing the genetic roadmap of the nation to a hostile foreign power. I am at the house, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. Gavin is here. The police need to come. Now. They are already 10 minutes out, Arthur replied grimly. Do not let him leave. I hung up. A strange, icy calm settled over me. It was the calm of a soldier who realizes the bomb has already detonated, and there is nothing left to do but watch the dust settle. I walked back into the dining room. The party was in full swing. Gavin was leaning back in his chair, gesturing wildly with a cigar in one hand. So I am thinking a G-Wagon, Gavin was saying to his father. Matty Black. Or maybe the new Aston Martin. With $80,000 cash and the returns Jessica is promising, why settle for less? I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. I placed my phone face down on the white tablecloth with a deliberate, heavy thud. The sound was sharp enough to silence the immediate area. "Gavin," I said. My voice was not loud, but it projected with a terrifying clarity. "Who exactly did you sell the building to?" Gavin rolled his eyes, letting out an exaggerated sigh for his audience. "Oh my God, are we still on this?" he groaned. "I told you, a private equity group, global something or other. They paid cash. Elena, who cares who they are?" "You should care," I said, locking eyes with him, "because that building was a designated federal data facility. And you just sold it to a company that is on the FBI terrorist watch list for technology theft." The room went deadly silent. A few guests lowered their glasses. Jessica, standing behind Gavin, frowned. "You are just trying to scare him because you are jealous." Jessica sneered. "It was a standard transaction. My contacts arranged it." "Your contacts," I asked, looking at her. "I hope your contacts have good lawyers." "You are being dramatic, Elena." Gavin laughed, though it sounded forced. "It is just business. Money is money. You are just mad I outsmarted you." At that exact moment, Gavin's phone rang. It was lying on the table next to his wine glass. The caller ID flashed Mr. Vorkov, buyer. See, Gavin grinned, picking it up and putting it on speaker to prove a point. It is them now, probably calling to thank me for the smooth deal. "Hello, Mr. Vorkov." The voice that came through the speaker was not thanking anyone. It was high-pitched, breathless, and thick with panic. "Mr. Sterling, you set us up," the man screamed. "Why are my accounts frozen? Why are there helicopters over my office? The FBI is breaking down my door. You said the building was clean. You said it was just a warehouse." Gavin's smile vanished. He stared at the phone, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I don't," Gavin stammered. "What are you talking about?" "They are charging me with espionage." The man on the phone shrieked, "I am ruining you for this. I will tell them everything. I will tell them you approached us." The line went dead. Gavin looked up at me, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure. The silence in the dining room was no longer awkward. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a grave. "Elena," Gavin whispered, his hands starting to shake violently. "What?" "What is happening? I tried to tell you," I said, crossing my arms. "But you never listened to the wife." "Do you?" The wail of sirens began as a low hum in the distance, but swelled within seconds into a deafening roar that vibrated against the expensive window panes. Before anyone could react, the manicured lawn outside was washed in a chaotic strobe of red and blue light. The beams cut through the dining room, turning the guests' terrified faces into grotesque, flickering masks. The heavy oak front doors burst open with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. A dozen figures swarmed into the foyer, moving with a synchronized, terrifying precision that silenced the room instantly. They were not local police. They wore navy blue windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned in bold yellow across their chests and backs. At the front of the phalanx walked a man with a grim, stone-carved face. I recognized him immediately from my security briefing's Special Agent Jenkins, the head of the high-tech crimes division. Gavin stood paralyzed at the head of the table. The crystal wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor, splashing crimson liquid onto his Italian leather shoes. He did not even flinch. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking like a corpse propped up in a suit. Victoria was the first to find her voice, though it was shrill with indignation rather than fear. She stood up, knocking over her chair. This is a private residence, Victoria shrieked, clutching her pearls. How dare you barge in here, someone call the sheriff. He is Preston's golf partner. Tell him to get these thugs out of my house immediately. Agent Jenkins ignored her as if she were a piece of furniture. He marched straight toward Gavin, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. 2 other agents flanked him, hands resting near their holsters. Gavin Sterling, Jenkins announced, his voice booming over the whimpers of the guests. You are under arrest. Arrest, Gavin squeaked, his voice cracking. For what? Wire fraud, forgery of federal documents, and violation of the Economic Espionage Act. Jenkins recited the charges with lethal calm. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Panic erupted in the room. Guests began to scramble away from the table, overturning glasses and plates. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jessica edging toward the kitchen swing door, her eyes darting around like a trapped rat. She was trying to slip away in the confusion. Secure the perimeter, Jenkins barked. 2 agents intercepted Jessica before she could take 3 steps. One of them grabbed her arm firmly. Hey, get your hands off me, Jessica yelled, trying to pull away. I am just a consultant. I do not know anything about this. We have a warrant for you too, Ms. Thorne, the agent said, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. Conspiracy to launder money and facilitation of illegal asset transfers. You can explain your consulting work to a federal judge. Gavin watched Jessica get cuffed, and his fragile reality finally snapped. As the agent pulled his arms back to restrain him, he began to thrash, his eyes wild and terrified. No! No! Wait! Gavin screamed, spit flying from his mouth. You are making a mistake. It is not me, it is her. He twisted his body, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. That is my wife's building, Gavin yelled, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Elena, tell them you told me to sell it. It is her property. She set me up. She is the one you want. Arrest her. The room went dead silent. Preston and Victoria looked at me, their eyes wide with a sudden, desperate hope that their golden boy could be saved by sacrificing me. They waited for the agents to tackle me. They waited for the handcuffs to click around my wrists. Agent Jenkins paused. He looked at Gavin, who was hyperventilating, and then he slowly turned his gaze toward me. He did not reach for his weapon. He did not reach for cuffs. Instead, Jenkins straightened his posture and nodded at me with distinct professional respect. Dr. Russo, Jenkins said, using the title I had earned but never heard spoken in this house. We received the automated breach report from your system. Thank you for your cooperation in securing the evidence. We have the logs. The air left the room. Gavin slumped in the agent's grip, his mouth hanging open. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, looking as though she had been physically struck. Preston stared at me, his face twisting in confusion and horror. In that moment, the hierarchy of the Sterling family disintegrated. They realized with a dawning, sickening clarity that I was not the defendant. I was the witness. I was the victim. And I was the only person in the room who was protected by the United States government. The dinner party dissolved into a procedural dismantling of the Sterling life. The agents moved with efficient brutality, sweeping across the mahogany table to confiscate the evidence of Gavin's crime. They bagged his smartphone, his laptop, and the sheaf of forged documents he had been waving around like a trophy just minutes earlier. The contract of sale for the foundry was dropped into a plastic evidence bag, transforming from a symbol of triumph into a one-way ticket to federal prison. My father-in-law, Preston, purple with indignation, tried to stand between an agent and Gavin's laptop. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a platinum money clip. "Now see here," Preston blustered, his voice trembling with rage. "There is no need for this theater. Whatever the fine is, I will write a check. I know the district attorney. I play bridge with the mayor. You cannot just waltz in here and, sir, step back. Agent Jenkins barked, cutting him off without looking up from his notes. If you interfere with a federal investigation or attempt to bribe an officer, you will be joining your son in the back of the van for obstruction of justice. Do not test me. Preston froze, his mouth snapping shut. For the first time in his life, his money had no voice. I stood up slowly, smoothing the creases of my suit. The room was silent except for the click of the handcuffs and the sound of Jessica sobbing as she was patted down against the wall. I walked over to where Gavin stood, hunched and broken, flanked by two towering agents. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red, pleading for a lifeline I had cut long ago. "Elena," Gavin whimpered. "Please, tell them. It was just an old warehouse. It was falling apart. I did it for us." "You did not sell a warehouse." "Gavin," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "You sold a secure off-site data facility designated as critical national infrastructure. That building contained the only physical offline backup for Project Chimera. You sold $2 billion worth of classified genomic data to a foreign intelligence front." I paused, letting the number sink in. $2 billion, I repeated softly, "and you sold it for $80,000. You sold national secrets for the price of a luxury car because you were too arrogant to ask your wife what she actually did for a living." Gavin's knees buckled. The agents had to hold him up by his armpits. I didn't know. He choked out. I wanted Dad to be proud. I wanted to be the one making the money for once. Jessica said it was a good deal. She said Jessica, Agent Jenkins interrupted, glancing over at the woman currently trying to kick an officer. "Ms. Thorne is not an investment consultant. Mr. Sterling. She is a known operative for a money laundering ring, targeting gullible heirs with access to real estate assets. She has been using you to wash dirty money for 6 months. You were not a partner. You were a mark." Gavin looked at Jessica, betrayal washing over his face. She stopped crying instantly and spat on the floor, her facade crumbling into sneering malice. "He was an easy target," Jessica hissed, desperate to feel important, pathetic. I am sorry," Gavin sobbed, tears streaming down his face now. "Elena, baby, please. I messed up, but I can fix it. I will fix it. We still have the house. We have our savings. Just get me a lawyer." I laughed then, a dry, humorless sound. "We have no savings." "Gavin," I said, "I have seen the withdrawals. You stole every penny of the liquid cash for your fake investments. And as for this house, I turned to Victoria, who was clutching the back of a chair for support. "You might want to sit down, Victoria." I said, "Your son did not just forge my signature on the warehouse deed. To get the liquidity, he needed to impress Jessica. He took out a second mortgage on this estate 3 months ago. He forged Preston's signature for that one." Victoria's eyes rolled back in her head. She slumped to the floor in a dead faint, her pearls clicking against the hardwood. Preston let out a strangled cry and dropped to his knees beside her. But his glare at his son was murderous. "You leveraged my house," Preston roared, his voice cracking. "You bet my house on a mistress I thought the crypto would pay it off," Gavin wailed, struggling against the cuffs. "It was supposed to triple. Take him away," Agent Jenkins ordered. The agents hauled Gavin toward the front door. He kicked and screamed, begging me, begging his father, begging God. I followed them out to the front porch. The rain had stopped, but the flashing lights illuminated the entire neighborhood. Every neighbor on the street was out on their lawn. Phones were raised in the air, screens glowing in the darkness. They were live streaming every second of the Sterling heir being dragged out in handcuffs. Elena Gavin screamed one last time as they shoved him into the back of the armored SUV. "Elena, I love you. Don't let them take me." I stood on the top step, looking down at him through the window of the vehicle. I did not wave. I simply turned my back on him and walked back inside to retrieve my purse. The show was over. The fallout from the party was swift, brutal and absolute. The federal government acted with a speed that left the local courts spinning because the transaction involved classified national security assets. The sale of the foundry to the shell company was immediately declared void from the start. The deed returned to my name before Gavin had even been processed at the federal detention center. The sentencing hearing took place 3 months later. I did not attend, but Arthur Vance called me with the update. The judge showed no leniency for a man who had treated federal espionage laws like a suggestion. Gavin was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and violation of the Economic Espionage Act. In the federal system, there is no parole. He would serve at least 85% of that time. He walked in a charming entrepreneur and would walk out a middle-aged man with nothing to his name. The Sterling dynasty crumbled just as fast. Preston and Victoria discovered that their social standing was built on a foundation of sand. Between the exorbitant legal fees for Gavin's defense and the civil restitution required for the bank fraud regarding the house mortgage, they were bled dry. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy less than a month after the arrest. The country club memberships were revoked, the golf buddies stopped calling, and they were forced to move into a 2-bedroom rental apartment in a part of town they used to mock. My exoneration was the only clean part of the mess. I spent 2 weeks working with the FBI, handing over my travel logs, my communication records, and, most importantly, the footage from the secret cameras at the foundry. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the protector of the data, not the seller. I filed for divorce the morning after the raid. Given the nature of Gavin's crimes and his attempt to defraud me, the judge did not just grant the separation, he awarded me 100% of the remaining marital assets. I took the Sterling estate, the house that had been my prison of politeness for 7 years, and I put it on the market immediately. I did not keep the money. I used the proceeds from the sale to establish the Russo Grant, a fund specifically designed to support female entrepreneurs who were building real businesses, not laundering money. The rest of the capital went into the foundry. 6 months after that fateful night, I stood on the dock behind the warehouse. The rusted chain-link fence was gone, replaced by state-of-the-art perimeter security patrolled by a private team hired by Ether Dynamics. The building behind me hummed with the quiet power of the servers in the vault, now officially recognized as one of the most secure data fortresses on the West Coast. I looked out at the gray water of the lake. It was calm. For the first time in a decade, my mind was quiet. There was no mother-in-law criticizing my shoes. There was no husband draining my bank account to buy validation. I had learned the hard way that my value did not come from being Mrs. Sterling. It came from the steel in my spine that Martha had seen all those years ago. My phone rang, breaking the silence. It was the CEO of Ether Dynamics. "Elena," he said, his voice crisp and respectful. "The board has reviewed your handling of the breach. We are impressed. The vice president position at the global headquarters in Zurich just opened up. It is yours if you want it." I watched a hawk circle over the water, free and untethered. "When do I start?" I asked. "As soon as you can get here," he replied. "Will you be bringing anyone with you?" "No," I said, smiling at the reflection of the woman in the water who had survived the fire. "I am coming alone." I hung up the phone and walked back toward the building. I had a flight to catch, and this time, I was not coming back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Elena's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.